doing. You were really motivated because you live in Newtown, and it was your neighbor who was the shooter in the Sandy Hook tragedy, and I know of the work that you do with the Alliance, and Josh, of course, has been recently profiled in the New York Times for this historic cases that you've won, Josh, with against the Remington Gun Company and the almost $1 billion settlement against Alex Jones that shut down InfoWars. We're two leaders in this community, and of course with the election and all, I mean, I don't know where things stand, and so I thought we would talk about the landscape right now and what you thought is effective that's happening in terms of advocacy and what isn't, and so just to start.
Well, I think lives in Washington. She says she's from Connecticut, but every time I see her, she's in Washington, D.C. making some politician's life miserable.
That sounds fantastic already.
So I'm going to turn it over to
So, Ko, tell us what you're up to these days.
Sure. So as you can imagine, the election results were devastating for anyone working in the gun control movement. So I've been in this space for 12 years after my neighbor killed 20 children and 6 educators on December 14, 2012. And we've been doing what Hannah and Nate suggested. We are live hunting the members of Congress. That's what we're doing. So we created an alliance. We're still operating as mostly an all-volunteer organizations with a couple consultants that work on a few aspects of what we do. But we essentially work with gun violence survivors from all corners of the nation, and particularly gun violence survivors from Parkland and Uvalde and Highland Park and elsewhere, and even in the city of Chicago. We work with those survivors because we are united in what we think we need for this nation to create the sea change that's necessary for us to start saving lives. So we support a comprehensive solution. It's passing the assault weapons ban, universal background checks, making sure that we repeal the gun industry legal shield to make it easier for lawyers like Josh to go after the gun industry to make them more accountable. So those are some of the policies that we've been pushing for. And there are 2 policies that we were getting so close to passing. It's the assault weapons ban and Ethan's law to keep kids safe from unsecured guns. Right? Those were 2 policies that we passed in the House of Representatives during last Congress under the leadership of Nancy Pelosi when she was the Speaker. We didn't have enough votes in the Senate because we had people, senators like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, who were against ending the filibuster and doing what they needed to do to make sure that guns were not the #1 killer of our children in this nation. So I know my husband's here right now, and he watches me go through this devastation after these elections. It happened in 2016 when Trump was elected. Donald Trump. Yeah, because we worked so hard in the years since Sandy Hook to change the conversation and to grow the gun violence prevention movement large enough that Hillary Clinton made gun violence prevention one of the priorities for her campaign. And we continue to work hard. We elected Joe Biden, and Joe Biden got more shit done on gun violence prevention without the help of the Congress than anyone else. So we really appreciated that. And then when he stepped down, it was still really hard for us because we're like, that's Joe. He did so much for us. And then we're like, we gotta wrap our arms around Kamala Harris, and she's gonna, we're gonna win a trifecta for her. We're gonna win the House of Representatives. We're gonna get a larger majority in the Senate. We worked really hard to get there, right? I'm sure many of you did too, but we did it. So, was it all for nothing all these years? No, because we're building a movement. And gun violence is still the #1 killer of our children, so we have to stay in the fight. And during the next 4 years, while it might get a little crazy in this country, we don't know which trajectory it will go in, but there are many democratic democracy defenders in us, and we're going to fight as hard as we can because the bills that have we have worked for until this point, we have to make sure that the Democrats who have championed it for all these years, they don't slip back. We need to make sure that they still make this number one priority and build for a future when someday we will get a trifecta and we will pass these laws that we need. Because in general, the American public is with us already. The public sentiment is with us. It's just we can't elect the right people in Congress to get the job done. But there are other things we can do, and Josh can do it. You know, while we wait. People like Josh, our attorneys general, our governors, our state politicians, they're going to be in the fight to continue to make progress in this space.
I have a lot of questions, Poe, about how you keep going, why, if the American public is on the side, what the disconnect is between the population and who we're electing. But first, Josh, do you want to tell us how are you coping right now? And
I'm doing great.
But in light of your recent cases that you've won, do you feel it? I don't feel is where are we at in terms of and what are you working on now after these cases have been adjudicated?
Well, I'm working right now. I'm spending a lot of my time in the Uvalde case, where if you do something like this, which I never set out to do, it just happened. All of a sudden, you become like typecast effectively, and that you become a mass shooting lawyer. I didn't know anything about guns or gun law, so I was probably pretty unqualified for it. But having had success in the Sandy Hook case now, I'm spending a lot of time. My office represents 17 of the children and their families who died in Uvalde. We've brought 3 lawsuits, two lawsuits in Texas and 1 lawsuit in California. The lawsuit in Texas, we had to sue the law enforcement responders. There were 376 officers who responded from multiple different agencies who all stood around for 77 minutes. As it turns out, it is the fight or flight instinct that we have within us, our survival instinct, prevents us from putting our life on the line. And you had a battle where what was one kid was like 150 pounds soaking wet, and you had 376 heavily armed officers, but it took 77 minutes. We had to bring a lawsuit there. We also sued Daniel Defense, who made the weapon used in Uvalde, who took who page right out of the playbook of the manufacturer who made the assault rifle in Sandy Hook, Remington, which is really owned by a big private equity company. Incredible story there, but they did the same thing of trying to target kids like this shooter in Parkland, Uvalde, Sandy Hook. They're all the same type of alienated kid. You all know these kids. We all went to school with them. Our kids go to school with them. Our grandkids go to school with them. They're the kids that you captured this so well. You want to hug them, but you also want your kids to stay a little bit away from them. There's a tension, and so that's what I'm doing now. I could keep going on, but Alex Jones, I'm done with that guy. He kissed my ass. And by the way, the onion just bought all this shit, so there you go.
So I did want to ask a question though about the InfoWars case and Alex Jones. So it seems to me, and maybe to many of us, that this is a big victory, right? To shut down, it was a defamation case.
Yes,
it was
right.
about the crisis actors and spreading these horrible lies about that really affected these families. And I wondered, is it a victory that we shut him down? Do they just come back, or do they? What does it get us?
I hope so, because I don't know what else we could do to this guy.
Right.
That's legal. But I think that and I think that one thing is we all, and I was like this, I really focused on the guns. I'm still very much in everybody in this room, and we all feel the same way, I think, about guns, especially after seeing the production. But I would say that the real killer lurking behind closed doors is greed. And it's not just greed, what Alex Jones said, it's greed in relationship to guns, because when we were growing up, when I was growing up, and I would have been a targeted person to market a weapon to, like an AR-15. And there were AR-15s in America. Anybody who wanted an AR-15, do I get one since 1978? I didn't even know what one was. Why? And because the gun industry couldn't reach me. Why couldn't they reach me? Well, I had parents, and they couldn't get around my parents, and they didn't have an end run around my gatekeepers. If I wanted to I just want to make this point because because there is a world, a real world that we live in, where if Poe Mori can't go to her grave getting an assault weapons ban, nobody can, okay? We live in the world, we have to confront the world we live in, not the world we wish we lived in. And the world we live in is not gonna have an assault weapons ban in my lifetime. I hope Poe proves me wrong. And even if there is, there's gonna be 4 to 10 million assault weapons, and there's gonna be a gun that just as lethal right underneath the definition. So what happened since the time when we were growing up, Annabelle, and today? Did you have a mass shooting drill when you were growing up in school?
No, we did have because I grew up in Florida, and the memory of the Cuban Missile Crisis was still there. We had the nuclear duck and cover.
Yeah.
I mean, but I think what Josh, what you're talking about though is the internet marketing.
The third lawsuit is what I want to talk about.
Yes, let's hear.
So I said there were 3 lawsuits in Uvalde, okay? And the third one comes out of what I learned in the Sandy Hook case, where I learned about the interconnectedness of the gun industry with the modern marketplace, which occurs online and it occurs directly. So it reaches the kid, the gun industry. Parents aren't even a nuisance anymore to the gun industry. They look right past the parents, they get to the kids, and they appeal to their sense of inadequacies, their sense of powerlessness, the sense of wanting to be somebody different like we all did when we were in adolescence. What are the 3 most notorious mass shootings in American history have? Well, 4, called Columbine. You have Sandy Hook, you have Parkland, and you have Uvalde. All by kids, adolescents, who were in the throes of adolescent turmoil. They didn't invent adolescent turmoil, at least in my own experience. Adolescence is nothing but a period of aggrievement and turmoil. And so what happened to change this was the gun industry, with the help of social media companies, Instagram, in my case, and Activision, who makes Call of Duty. And I know it is verboten to talk about entertainment and try to blame a video game for shootings, and I never would have done that with any other game or entertaining experience. That's a big disclaimer. However, there is no doubt in my mind that the immersive, addictive, dopamine-fueled educational training tool that Call of Duty is responsible partly for mass shootings in America. All the kids, the kid that killed 77 people in Norway, Denmark, one of the Scandinavian countries, he was trained, by his own testimony, on Call of Duty. Nicholas Cruz was a Call of Duty player, Uvalde shooter. They all were. And that's another reason why I didn't know anything about AR-15s. Sorry, I'm hogging the thing.
No.
And I would just say one thing about Trump. There's one good thing about Trump, which is when he's president, gun sales go, because nobody's scared about, what drives gun sales are bans, threats of bans, and a liberal president coming in. Now that does not mean I'm happy about Trump, but hey, there's gotta be a silver lining somewhere. And that's why they call it the Trump slump. In the documents this is one last thing, and it leads back to politics, and I can turn it back over to Poe, which is that in the discovery where nobody else in times even me didn't think we would necessarily get there, we broke through a barrier that hadn't been broken through, and we got into the dungeon of the largest gun conglomerate in American history, and we got documents from them, and they had PowerPoints in which they said that the political winds were against us. They were trying to project sales, and when they referred to political winds being against them, it was a Republican. Republicans were in control of the presidency and the House and the Senate. Political winds are against them when there is somebody that is for them, because people don't feel freaked out to rush out and get their guns.
I do feel though, we're living in a different environment right now where people that are marginalized are feeling insecure. So I recently read an article about a transgender in Vermont who is a liberal and is going to buy a gun to protect himself. So that's the scary world that we're living in, and that's why there are, some scary thoughts of civil war, is because liberals may be buying guns, and we need to get out in front and just, explain to everyone that there are risks of bringing guns into your home. It actually doubles your risk of homicides, and it triples your risk of suicides. And when there's a gun present, in a domestic violence situation, you're 5 times more likely to get killed. So these are the risks that you have to understand before you bring a gun into your home. So we're trying to get out there, with these, PSA, like, okay, before you bring a gun in, you gotta think about these risks. So it'll be interesting to see if there will be a Trump slump this time, because this election is like no other.
Yeah.
And the outcome is like no other, where we.
Then there's literally nothing good about Trump being elected.
Exactly. I know. So I'm telling you that there might not be a silver lining in that way. So we're keeping a really close eye on that to make sure, right? I would love nothing more than a Trump slump.
Yeah, that's a good point.
How, when you talk about this subject, do you think about all guns in the same category as machine guns? Are you focused on automatic weapons or just all?
So automatic weapons have been banned in a sense that they stopped making fully automatic weapons. Right? They passed that law many years ago, and that it is heavily controlled by the ATM, the Bureau of Alcohol, and Tobacco. And so if you own a machine gun, it has to be registered, and you have to pay taxes on it, and you have to go through loopholes to be able to even transfer it to somebody. Okay, so we want the same for semi-automatic. AR-15s are semi-automatic weapons. And we work really closely with Dianne Feinstein and David Cicilline, who wrote the bill. Lucy Macbeth, if you guys know her, she was a gun violence survivor. She lost her son in a shooting, and she took over that bill. But that bill bans specifically about 205 types of assault weapons, and it is clearly defined. Also in that bill, there are like over 2,000 guns that you can keep for hunting or other purposes. So we've been really focused on making sure that the assault weapons are treated the same way as the machine guns, right? But handguns, right? We just want to make sure that people have their background checks. And if you're mentally ill or suffering from an issue, then we want to make sure that that gun can be temporarily removed, like the red flag laws that you've heard of, right? Take it away until they are in a better shape to have those guns. So those are the type of legislative proposals that we have been pushing for. So it's not all guns. I don't think any group is saying ban all guns. And banning AR-15s doesn't mean like you have to get rid of your AR-15 right now. It means that you're gonna have to start registering them. We want you to be, we want to make sure that you have background checks and you're able to, own that gun. It's grandfathered in. There's not a law right now where those guns are literally taken away from people, right? But from the other side, they're all saying basically that we want to ban every gun, and it's so not true at this point.
I have 2 questions, and I'd love to open this up. I'm wondering about what kind of disruptor to that landscape the ghost gun issue is. And also, one of the issues that Michelle brings up in this play is the gaping difference between our gun laws in the United States and the rest of the world. And just if you thought maybe you might address that at all, I would love to hear that.
Yeah, so I'll start with ghost guns. So ghost guns are guns, you can buy a ghost gun kit and you can put it together. They basically sell you the receiver, part of like, let's say an AR-15, and it doesn't have certain holes in it. So they didn't count it as an official gun piece. So Joe Biden did something about it, right? He's been trying to do something about it with his executive actions, but all of those would be just all thrown out. The emerging threat right now is actually, there's a little piece of plastic that can be produced. It's like called auto sears, and you attach it to a semi-automatic weapon, like a handgun, and it will turn that gun into a fully automatic weapon. So, you know, they're in the process of trying to ban those pieces as well.
Yeah, and what happens is as soon as Chicago or another city tries to do something about auto sears or weapons, the NRA and the well-funded special interests file lawsuits. So with the bump stock, they came up with the idea that it was discrimination, because how could an old lady in a wheelchair possibly protect herself without having a bump stock, clipped onto her AR-15? And courts, look, I mean, one thing about the president is he appoints federal judges, and that's probably, in my view, the most lasting damage any president can do or benefit, because they have federal lifetime appointments. So, you know, what Trump, you get in front of a Trump judge and you get these laws, these really incredible laws that Poe spends her life fighting for, and you get them challenged, and sometimes they get knocked down, and it depends on where you are and what judge you end up with. But the concern that I have is that these things end up getting to this United States Supreme Court, and they resolve the issue for good. And you know that if they take a case, it's not coming out good.
Josh, you mentioned the marketing, and that's your next focus. So if you can share with us, what are you
well, the marketing was the focus of the Sandy Hook case. We had to get around, we had to find a way that the gun company, or the gun conglomerate that made the Bushmaster AR-15 used in Sandy Hook, we had to find a way that they broke Connecticut law, but we couldn't sue them. You can't sue them for ordinary negligence like a regular company. You can't sue them for products liability like a regular company. These things that you've heard of, if you're not lawyers, Congress has prevented the gun industry from those types of lawsuits. They've passed something called what, Poe? The Protection of
Lawful Arms and Commerce Act.
Commerce and Arms
Commerce
Act.
and Arms Act.
But among other things, she knows more about the law than I do. But it's a protection of lawful commerce and arms act. It does not protect unlawful commerce. So we found there's a statute in Connecticut that says you can't market a product basically immorally, unethically, or there's another unsavourily. And this gun company was doing exactly what I said before, which is why we have mass shootings today when we don't have them before. They are pushing that. They were figured out a way to reach kids, like troubled kids and adolescents in general, to build a relationship with a future consumer as early as possible by selling them a solution to their problems. And that's not just what you see in the marketing where they say get your man card out, or clear the room, or the lone gunman, or Daniel Defense has hands pulling out an AR-15 from a trunk saying, refuse to be a victim. And guess who connected Daniel Defense to the Uvalde shooter? Anybody?
Alex Jones?
No. Somebody even worse. No.
Joe Rogan?
Mark Zuckerberg. Instagram. Instagram just lets gun companies do that. And we have the shooter's phone, so I know all this stuff. I know too much about this. It's dystopian. But anyway, if you promise a solution to a kid, a struggling adolescent, that's what we're seeing. And so we're, instead of just now targeting the gun company, we're targeting the enabling commercial predators, which are so-called legitimate businesses like Activision and Meta.
And those aren't protected by the same, that sort of wall of protection around the gun companies.
They don't have the same one, but they have other ones.
Yeah.
They have the First Amendment, which, by the way, is sacred-ish. And they also have Section 230 immunity. You may have heard that you can't sue a social media company simply for hosting somebody else's content. And the parameters of that are still being worked out. So they have very strong immunities as well.
I thought people might have questions, so why don't we do that? Let's start.
I think this is probably more for Poe since you work in the advocacy space. I'm not under the false impression we're gonna get an assault weapons ban anytime soon. But I do believe that it's possible to get bipartisan support for strengthening red flag laws, background checks, marketing, maybe even some licensing or training. I trained and led the lobby group of March for Our Lives kids who lobbied Mitch McConnell to vote for the bipartisan gun safety legislation most recently. I know it's possible, and I'm curious what your focus is in the next 2 years for the midterms, what the legislative focus is, what you think there might be possibility for movement on.
I don't think there's gonna be a possibility for a lot of movement, so I think we have to be realistic. It's important for us, like I said earlier, is to make sure that the Democrats, who we fought so hard for, stay with us. Because they could easily just slip and become more moderate and go towards that side, so we're gonna make sure that they're with us. And then during midterms, we have to fight harder to win the majority back. But meanwhile, we need to make sure that all our champions continue to reintroduce all those bills that we worked so hard on. The bill to repeal FLACA, right? To get rid of the gun industry legal shield. We decided to work on it this past year, and we said it's going to be our priority. We're gonna add that on. And we went from having 61 co-sponsors for the bill to 142 now. So what we do is, we go door to door and make our champions support the bill that must pass.
I've seen her go door to door, it's not working.
We haunt them.
Up there, with the scarf, thank you.
Thank you very much. Just two quick questions. Josh, are these lawsuits against gun manufacturers under the unsavory clause, are those gathering?
Which I just made up that word.
Okay.
Unscrupulous, that's the word.
Unscrupulous. Gathering, these are all in state courts.
They're all, well, yes.
I mean, they would have to be state courts.
Well, in Uvalde, the gun companies is getting a little wonky, but they try to move them to federal courts, because federal courts tend to be more stacked with conservatives. And so and right now we're in Texas federal court in our Uvalde case. It's not the best place to be, I would say. But we're trying to bring it back to Texas state court, which is a little less worse.
Okay, so you're working on it. And then we've read a lot in the news about the Alex Jones case and the takeover of InfoWars by the Onion, which is truly perfect. How are you doing actually collecting?
Well, I think the check is in the mail, actually. I was supposed to be getting $1 billion. I think it's Tuesday, I'm not sure. He doesn't have $1 billion. He made a lot of money. He also spent and hid and probably laundered a lot. Probably, I didn't say he laundered it. I said probably laundered it. That might be. And so he has about 15 million plus or minus liquid assets. So we're gonna try to distribute that equitably among the families, and then they will have the right to chase him for the rest of his life.
So you actually have control of this 15 million?
I mean, not personally. Yeah, the bankruptcy court currently has control, and his judgment was, he tried to say to the bankruptcy court, throw the judgment out. The bankruptcy court said, I can't, although this bankruptcy court probably would have. The judge said he can't because it was an intentional act. So that's a non-dischargeable, and the intentional act was he intentionally lied and maligned people, and everybody knows it was to sell his ridiculous products.
Right here.
Going back to the play, I'm wondering how the script was written. Was it coordinated with people?
I'm gonna let Michelle answer that, but just briefly, as far as I understand, it was begun with interviews with Ivy Seamus, who is the teacher who at Parkland was teaching Holocaust history class. So that, and Michelle got interested in Ivy's story and interviewed her and did a lot of research, is my understanding.
You voted?
Yes. I met Ivy Shamus, the teacher who's represented so beautifully by Annabelle, quite by accident. And when I heard, I had always wanted to do something about guns, because I just was somebody who hated guns. I didn't know any more than that. I just was happy for them to all go away. I have no no, we're not trying to take away all your guns. If I could take away all the guns, I'd be happy to take away all the guns. But I realized it's not reasonable. And when I found out that she was teaching this Holocaust history class, I thought it was just incredibly ironic that they were doing reports on hate crimes when this kid shot into the classroom. So that became my jumping off point. And then I had been following, the work of Poe and other people just on Twitter, just wanting to know what's out there, what's being done, what I could do. I'm not a great fundraiser, and I'm not great at marching because I don't like crowds, but besides donating money, I just wanted to find something that I could do where I felt like I could contribute. And so just by sort of following all these amazing people and seeing what they were doing and putting Ivy's story together, it eventually worked into this. And then we were so fortunate that Annabelle was able to connect us to Josh. I had been in touch with Poe, and that they would actually make the trip here to come speak to all of us. For me, it's like having celebrities here. They're up there at my plate.
Thank you.
Back in our cast member, Andrea.
Hi, I was just wondering if you could speak about the gun show loopholes and if there's anything being done about that, or, I mean, I'm from Texas and I know that that's one of the ways a lot of people can get these weapons. We saw a lot of people stock up right before the election at these gun shows, and yeah, I was just wondering if you have
So, we have some good news. So after the Uvalde shooting, the Congress was poised to do something. So Congress passed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, and in it, they passed a provision that would help to close the gun show loophole. And they did that by expanding the definition of who's engaged in the business of selling guns. So that expanded, the number of people and businesses that have to register as an FFL, federally licensed dealers. So that's how we're trying to close that loop.
Thank you.
Oops.
Oh, no. Go ahead, yes.
Recently, I think there were 2 cases where parents were held accountable and are now in prison. And that seems rather new to me. And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about that. Is that a movement, or is that part of the new awareness, or just any thoughts that you have on that?
Well, I've kind of struggled with this, to be honest. When I first was handling the Sandy Hook case 12 years ago, I thought any lawsuit, blaming anybody other than the gun industry and what they were doing, was a gift to the gun industry. So for example, there was a lawsuit filed in Sandy Hook against the school, and I was like, no way, I'm not participating in that. Like, is it true that are we really reached this level where we have to put it on the teachers? Like, you did such a good job of putting it on teachers in the school, and even law enforcement. And there are some cases where you just can't look the other way, like Uvalde. But I didn't get into the Uvalde case to sue law enforcement, but you have to. But getting back to the parents, that's why I feel. But on the other hand, if you recall what I said earlier, we live in the real world that we live in is riddled with guns. And if parents are going to have guns around and they're going to give them to their kids, and the kids are going to kill people, then I can see a prophylactic effect of bringing the parents up on criminal charges. It's hard. At the end of the day, it's really hard for me to find fault with that. But again, I'm worried about putting a lot of focus on the outcome versus the who said breadcrumbs. Go back to where the bread was made. And you've got a macro and a micro thing going at the same time that way predated the past. But yeah, I think it's a movement, and I think it's going to happen more.
And
But, and 50% of America just shares their guns in their house. We might not do it in our homes, but.
So 76% of school shooters get their guns from their parents. So that's why we're trying to pass this law, because that will help prevent those school shootings. And about 200,000 guns get stolen every year from private residences and ends up in the streets in the cities. So that's why it's important for us to, I think, tackle it in a macro level and also.
I would say that one area that, like the stuff that Poe is doing, that she's a leader, really a leader, like among the community of people who do that, is well served by Poe, and there's something that isn't really being pushed that I think would save more lives and would maybe more doable, and that would be requiring gun makers to palm print or have biometrically mark their weapons. Rather than having a gun show loophole, you should close gun show loopholes. But, one thing that all these kids have in common is if they get their weapons from their parents, well, that would prevent that shooting, because they couldn't use their parents' weapon. That seems to me to be, you're not infringing on the Second Amendment, you're not trying to ban anything. You're using technology, and it would apply to handguns as well. All the crime that's committed with weapons that are stolen, somebody else's property, what if it was dysfunctional, if it was in the hands of somebody else?
And as you can imagine, the gun industry and the gun lobby are against it, because they like it when all those guns seep into, the community illegally, because then they can gin up the fear that you need to arm up against the bad guys, the scary guys with the guns. So their mission is just to sell more guns, even though we have 465 million civilian gun stock right now. And can you guys guess what percentage of guns being produced now are AR-15s? Take a guess.
70.
10.
Would you say 7?
70.
70%?
That's high.
It's 25 now.
That's right.
But in 1990, about the time I was graduating from college, it was 1.2%. So during the last 3 decades, I mean, it's just out of control. And that's why with this crazy deceptive marketing practices tied with the availability, easy access to assault weapons, is why Parkland and Sandy Hook and Uvalde is happening.
In the red t-shirt right back there?
Yeah, thank you all for being here. I actually grew up in Monroe, Connecticut, right next to Newtown, and the day Sandy Hook happened, I was working at a school about 30 minutes away. And one of my colleagues was from Sandy Hook. It was anyway, a crazy day. And but based on what you all were talking and the InfoWars case and all that, I just was wondering if there were ever any legal grounds on which Alex Jones could have potentially faced prison time for all the pain and hurt that he caused.
It would have been a clever and bold prosecutor, but if only we didn't get rid of debtor's prison, like in the 1800s or whatever, we could get him into debtor's prison. He has caused more harm than most criminals have, to be sure. But this is gonna sound like I'm being mostly serious here, just to make a point. That I met a bunch of people in these different cases. Alex Jones, though, was not the worst person I met. The worst people I met were the private equity people who put together the Remington deal, that are responsible, I think, in terms of corporate responsibility, are probably more responsible for mass shootings in America today, and you don't know their name. You don't know the name of the guy I'm talking about, who's the worst human being I've ever met. And I've met Alex Jones.
It's real.
And so, it's always the case, isn't it, if you follow the money. And private equity has as dirty hands in this whole mess as does the American gun industry. That is not an exaggeration.
So that's an opportunity for us. I sit on a board called Guns Down America, and we're trying to lift up that type of story.
That would be great.
Right? And highlight those bad actors in the corporate space.
You had a question right here, the glasses.
Well, my first question is kind of that, but you talk about red flag laws, it sounds so logical, like who could be against it, but do you have any cases where that actually works and it really, you know, I mean, somebody's got a gun and it gets taken away and the ACLU doesn't end up being on the wrong side of that, or on the other side of that, just to, you know.
So many of the states have passed,
They passed it,
yeah,
but I mean,
state
where it
red
just
flag
has an
laws,
effect.
and in the state of Connecticut actually was one of the first states that passed, some form of red flag law. And it's mostly prevented suicides more than anything else. So a family member would say, I'm really worried, you know, that my husband is having a mental illness, you know, issue, and, you know, we need to make sure that his gun is taken away for a while. And there's a due process, right?
Yeah, and well, there is, and it used to be a matter of civil liberties. I think it's kind of what you're, like, the ACLU is in a weird situation right now, because they're dealing with First Amendment and Second Amendment, both of which have been distorted, in my view, and manipulated in a very, very serious way. And it just reminds me that my father once represented Black Panthers, and he came into court, and when they took the Black Panthers guns, it was just like, these people have, you know, my clients have a right to own this gun. It's Second Amendment, you know, he made the Second Amendment argument. So a lot of these one-time very liberal principles, and the First Amendment for sure. When we sued Alex Jones, I got a postcard from a very unfriendly liberal who said, you know, we marched in Skokie, and you're going to go after this guy for his speech, and I'm like, well, I wasn't born then, but and I had to look it up, and I'm like, yeah, wow, we've really come a long way. But I think it's tough to be a liberal right now, and to reconcile how you feel, especially about the First Amendment. I've got a lot of feelings about that, but it's tough.
I want to get a couple more questions in. I want to just say.
Sorry, I have a very quick comment. I will be quick. I also had a question, but that's not important. I've been raising my hand, and I'm not angry at you for not picking me. No, I know. It's just one thing that did feel important to say is that, and I want to be clear, I respect both of your work immensely. I don't think this was ill-intentioned, and I don't even know that it was done consciously. But when talking about the progressive in Vermont who purchased a gun, you described them as a transgender. Transgender is an adjective, and I say this as a non-binary trans person. Transgender is an adjective, not a noun. And that might seem like semantics, but particularly in a climate where trans people are being really systemically dehumanized, it feels really important to say a transgender person. I don't think that's just semantics right now. And again, I know it wasn't ill-intended at all. It feels important to me that people in this room here, that the kind of norm and standard for talking about trans people is a trans or transgender person. That was all.
Thank you. Alessandro, you are in our cast, had a question.
Yeah, I think I really wanted to hear more about the connection you made between Call of Duty and video games in general, and these types of video games in general, and gun violence. Especially also in the play, we talk about how school shootings are such an American problem, and these games are around in the entire world.
Right.
So I was wondering how that connection.
Yeah, that's a great. It sounds like a good argument for Call of Duty.
No. Okay, I'll explain it.
But that is one of the pushback arguments. Just really 30,000 foot view. Just stop thinking about Call of Duty as a video game and think about it like a flight simulator. You can't get on a plane without a pilot who's trained on a flight simulator. That's training, and they recreate in flight simulators everything that go wrong, so that the internal system of the pilot maintains a very steely presence if there's something that's going wrong with the plane, right? And not only that, they learn the mechanics of the plane. They learn what things are called. They become habituated to it. And as it turned, although it is despicable, there's also a certain amount of courage, messed up courage, or I wish I could think of a better word. I hope somebody could think of a better word. But to carry out a mass shooting is antisocial. It is not really within us to do that. So you have to overcome And you pretty much know, the individual's gonna know they're gonna probably get killed. So there has to be a habituation to that. Where does that happen? Where's the training grounds and the habituation happening? It's happening directly, kids are being groomed by Call of Duty, and it's interconnection with Instagram and social media, and the gun industry, you know, they're in a predatory three-headed monster relationship, if you will, where they're promised a solution, they can act out their selves, and there's a study out that says that the virtual self of teenagers today is more important to them than their anatomical self. Because when we were growing up, we could run, but we couldn't hide from our adolescent problems, you know? I mean, we could hide in our room, but we couldn't hide online. We couldn't project somebody we weren't. If you felt you were unattractive, you couldn't project, you know, sexual prowess online. You couldn't project power. You know, you couldn't project fearlessness or even violence. So, you know, Call of Duty, mass shootings have not always been around in America in the way that they have today. That's really important for you guys to know as you think about this problem. If AR-15s have been in America since 1978, the real mass shooting epidemic didn't start until really 2012 with Aurora, and then it's been nonstop ever since. But that has ushered in the modern epidemic of mass shootings. It corresponds to rising AR-15 sales, but only after the first wave of rising AR-15 sales occurred with the Obama presidency. And it was a strictly political marketing ploy by the gun industry. They got a big break, and they started saying this guy's gonna take everybody's, not just their weapons, but their women and children. And so who would rush out and buy an AR-15 in that scenario? Who would respond to that marketing? Not a kid, a grown-up, an adult, a father of the house. Now, they might not be the people who in this audience similar, but those people don't commit mass shootings. Once that dried up, and you have a gold rush coming in of competitors, you said Poe, you know, this is historically not a weapon that anybody wanted. Now everybody wants this weapon. What happens to all those gun companies that weren't making them? They want in on the gold rush. What happens to that private equity firm that's bet $1 billion on owning the AR-15 market? They're a victim of their own success, so they have to reach a new market. What's the market? Adolescents. How do they get there? Call of Duty. The gun used in Sandy Hook was placed in Call of Duty. They had a special licensing agreement, and I have that document, one of the documents we got in the discovery. So when Uvalde happened, and we looked at the relationship of Daniel Defense, they were doing the same thing. And I said, well, in the 10 years that the Sandy Hook case against the gun company was pending, if I ever get a chance to bring in these other commercial predators, we got to do it, because look at this. Look at this gun industry. They're not acting alone. You know, they're not. They have to have help reaching kids. So Call of Duty, I think, getting back to it, is, you know, I can draw a direct line between the Uvalde shooter through Call of Duty to the Uvalde shooting. I could have done it with the Sandy Hook shooting too. There's the kid used a taped reload, which is a 230 round magazines taped together. And he was a shut-in. He learned all of that from Call of Duty. I have all his video games, and he played Call of Duty extensively. So you can't tell me that there's no relationship between Call of Duty and killing. Not just any video game. Remember, it's a training simulator. And I say that as a big supporter of the arts and entertainment, and the First Amendment as it's traditionally been interpreted.
Who created the Call of Duty?
The company called Activision, which is now owned by Microsoft. So that case is pending in California.
But we have to remember too, that the assault weapons ban, the initial one, it expired.
Right, in 2004.
In 2004. So then, that was coupled with the social media and the marketing, the easy availability.
Yes. It's all happening at once.
It's just all happening together.
And placa.
Yeah, and placa.
I've been told we have time for one more question. Gosh.
Well, I just wanna, before we all leave, because the hope with this play is that some people would feel moved toward action. And so before we close it all out, you can ask another question, but I would like to hear from both of you how we can haunt, do what you're doing. Like, if we feel so moved, what is the best way for us to get involved and take action?
So we have made it so easy for anyone to haunt members of Congress. So I said, like, we hired a few consultants. We have one consultant, Angela Weber. She's actually, she's a survivor herself. Her son survived Parkland. So she's joined our effort. And so every Mondays when she's around, she's in Japan right now, but on Mondays at noon to 2, what we do is we host a Zoom lunch and lobby session where anyone can call in, and she literally tells you how to go about haunting members of Congress that we need.
We'll put a link to that at the New Light Theater. We'll share that link, right? We can do that.
So it's on our Newtown Action Alliance website. It's newtownactionalliance.org, and you can find how you can take action. But every Mondays, if you feel compelled to take action, it's really easy. We just give you a list of members of Congress that we need. Like, I want you to co-sponsor, repealing PLACA bill, and that's how we've been getting them, right? So an average person can go on and make a huge difference. So,
Josh.
Send all your money to vote, and spend all your time. I'll give you something really concrete, specific to this play. The weapon that the shooter comes in at the end is a Smith & Wesson M&P 15 weapon. This weapon has been used in more mass shootings than any weapon in American history. It was used in Aurora. It was used in San Bernardino. It was purchased, though not used, in Uvalde. It was used in Parkland. And after all that, Smith & Wesson just doubled down in promoting this weapon. So if it's the weapon most related to, in a marketing way, with famous mass shootings, and it was finally used in Highland Park, which we are representing families in Highland Park. So I know a lot about Smith & Wesson. Somebody says they're publicly traded. There's only 2 publicly traded gun companies. One of them is Smith & Wesson. You know what to do. Find out and I wouldn't even, if you want to spend some time and do something that actually makes a direct difference, you could go and find out if your broker, since any of our people got money, why else would they be here? But find out if Fidelity has a mutual fund with Smith & Wesson in it, and pull out and say, or your bank, see if your bank does any business. I don't have that information, but if you do you have that information?
Advising to university endowments, when the students are all trying to do
Yeah.
I mean, it is different when you talk about climate change and it's very vague. This is not a lot less vague.
This is direct.
When you're talking about, if you know who the worst, a word God's worse than Alex Jones, why don't you tell us? Why don't? Is that?
we haven't.
Is that
Yeah. So.
liable to let it be
Well-
known who that is?
You gotta tell us.
We never had this conversation.
Yeah, well, okay, but I mean, just in general, there's endowments, there's big investment funds.
Yes,
And
I know.
people are looking to do something, and so many of the things that they're called on to do are very impractical, and it's not.
Right, that's what I'm getting at.
But this is not, it's not really, there's not really 2 sides,
Right, so Guns Down America is that group, that will share with you, which companies and,
Smith
bad
& Wesson
actors.
reported that
Yeah.
in their their SEC filings, that they've noticed that every time there's a mass shooting, gun sales go through the roof. So there's a reason why they keep pushing the M&P 15. The whole thing is, it's a disgraceful story of greed. But I just gave you one, Smith. I mean,
Private equity guys that you.
come see me in my office. No tape recording. Yeah.
Yes. Just one last quick question. Did you have that?
That's all right, I'll do my research.
Okay.
Please, one more.
One more.
Thank you
One
very
more.
much.
Yes.
Just wanted to thank you both and thank the playwright so much for taking a stand in this way. I think about the Sandy Hook families almost every day, even though 10 years have passed. Could you just tell us how they're doing? Is there anything that we can do for them? What's happening with these people who have lost everything?
Well, I mean, the Sandy Hook families are like all families and all human beings are incredible. Their ability to get out of bed And, you know, most of the kids who died had siblings. So they had to go about and raise their surviving kids. So I've seen siblings, young siblings now going to college. Families move, they are doing, it's weird to say, but they're doing about as well as you, probably better than you could possibly imagine. And actually, you know, that's the thing. Like, it is just incredible how resilient human beings are. As flawed as we are, we're really pretty resilient, and especially in the face of tragedy. And maybe that's evolutionary, I don't know, but it's very kind of you to say that you think about them. They're very, very, I just saw, just was with a family the other night. They're wonderful people, they're doing fine. The Uvalde families are still in the earlier stages. It's obvious, but Uvalde is a very, very poor community. Parkland, you know, Sandy Hook, Newtown, Connecticut, they're one thing that the families didn't have to worry about as much was that. So if you wanted to devote energy or money, I would if you've reached Poe's max, you may want to look into helping the Uvalde families. They're very, very in need.
So I want to say, you're all welcome to attend the 12th Annual National Vigil for All Victims of Gun Violence. Every year since the Sandy Hook tragedy, we knew that we wanted to uplift the voices of those survivors who are not impacted by high-profile shootings, but shootings of all types. So this is our 12th annual, and it's held in St. Mark's Episcopal Church right on Capitol Hill. And we're bringing in about 200 gun violence survivors from all across the country. We get together, we honor them, and then the next day, guess what we're doing? Lobbying. We make sure that they meet with their members of Congress. We don't want them to forget what happened to them and what will happen in the future if they continue to do nothing about the issue.
When is that?
That is December 11th in DC, but it'll be streamed live on Facebook. So Newtown Action Alliance Facebook page, you'll be able to see it.
Thank you, everyone, for staying and asking great questions. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.